Hello, everyone. Remember, this is not a news show. If you want news, go somewhere else. This is a political platform for discussing ideas. With that being said, let's begin. So, I'm doing a second video today because the first video today was kind of fluffy and I wanted to get a little more serious. Talk about something very important. Now, we live in a time of incredible political tribalism and division, mostly fueled by the far left and progressives who have essentially become leftism light, who they kind of echo the far left a little bit. That is not to say that we should in any way vilify progressives, like you might have done in the 1980s under Reagan, but it is extremely problematic at this point. Suffice to say, excuse me, I want to discuss with you a solution to Antifa and other extremists, such as BLM, or even right-wing extremists like Proud Boys, or the Boogaloo Boys, or whoever. This boys and that boys and boys, boys, boys. I'm a man, I'm a Boogaloo man. That was kind of cringy. Anyway, first I wanted to discuss critical thought and the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, located somewhere near the forehead, is a region of the brain that affords the capacity for logical, rational thinking and analysis. Without it, we could not really think logically or reasonably. And what's very interesting is that without the prefrontal cortex, we would behave in a more reactionary manner, where our emotions would dictate our actions through the limbic system, which is the oldest part of the brain that's developed prior to the prefrontal cortex. It's the most powerful and the most overwhelming. It dominates most human action. We are not simply developed enough in the logical area of our brains to yet overpower our limbic system. And what's interesting is that without the prefrontal cortex, we would behave in a fashion similar to toddlers, who frequently, their threat detection region of their brain is hyperactive. They throw tantrums, they throw fits, they experience cognitive dissonance, all that. And generally speaking, if you do not make regular use of your prefrontal cortex and instead give in to your limbic response, you will begin to act in a way that is not totally dissimilar to a toddler. And what's interesting about this is if you look at these leftists and discuss with them, and even some progressives, you will find that they are clearly not using their prefrontal cortex. They are ignoring logic and reason, and they are focusing on pure limbic response. Some of them will even throw tantrums just like a 3 or 4-year-old. I remember there was this one progressive chick who got famous on YouTube for a while for essentially literally throwing a tantrum in her car when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. She was literally just like, ah! That is what happens when you're serially in the habit of not utilizing logic and reason, and instead appealing to your limbic response. Her prefrontal cortex was disengaged, and her limbic system was free to act out however it wanted. And all that system in the brain does is just distribute hormones and neurotransmitters. You act like an emotional freak, where facts don't matter and feelings do. Now imagine repeating Ben Shapiro's famous line to one of these people. The emotional response could potentially be violent. They are totally irrational. And in the natural world, there is the natural law of use it or lose it. Right? If you don't use your math skills, you'll eventually lose them. And you'll become bad at math. Or if you don't use your reading skills, you become bad at reading, or etc., etc. So what happens if you serially develop the habit of not using your prefrontal cortex and not using logic and reason? Would you, through habit, essentially take this part of the brain and switch it off? If you don't use it, you lose it. So what if these leftists, their prefrontal cortex and their capacity for logic and reason is, in some sense, switched off? Could we maybe find a way to turn it back on and help them to build up their logic and reason skills and turn them into sane, normal people and not reactionary, overgrown children? But still to this day, leftists are very emotional and childlike. And they may even be held back developmentally. Because if you remember, back in the 90s, once the initial progressive movement from the 80s under Reagan, in the 90s they were finally old enough to have children, talk of liberal parenting techniques, early on they were largely devoid of discipline. They did not spank, they did not raise their voices. They were all about development of imagination and feelings of love and tenderness, but no discipline, because they felt discipline was too harsh. And the end result was children who were never punished for any misdeed, and they could act in whatever way they wanted. And their emotional tantrums, instead of punished or devalued, were instead permitted with no consequence. Now imagine you growing up in that environment and then becoming an adult with no discipline whatsoever. What do you act like as an adult? Do you still throw tantrums to get what you want? Yes, you do. And these leftists may very well be the result of liberal parenting techniques that were used back in the 90s, which were devoid of discipline. As they got forward, they invented a sort of progressive discipline based around psychology, which also incorporated fair play, no competition. When they finally got discipline involved in the liberal parenting technique, it was better. But a lot of these kids produced by this technique were still very soft and squishy and really just very beta male, very unappealing. The kind of people that you honestly kind of want to put in a permanent headlock and just hold them there because you really just kind of fucking hate them, you know? They invoke a very primal reaction in a lot of people. But suffice to say, I do believe that these people are the illogical, irrational, childlike leftists are a product of that early attempt at liberal parenting technique. And we're going to be dealing with them for quite some time. I am unfortunately at an age where by the time these people essentially disappear, I will already be dead. I will be dead. I will have to live the rest of my life knowing that I share an earth with these whacked out, insane, irrational, basically overgrown toddlers. It makes me feel crazy. But that's what happens when your prefrontal cortex sees rare usage, if not any usage at all. It may eventually just disappear and stop functioning altogether. Suffice to say, the reason why a toddler does not have the logical reason is because the prefrontal cortex that creates those capabilities is literally not formed yet. Like, the physical fleshy mass of it is present, but it's still growing. And as long as it is still growing, it is largely inactive. And it does not become active typically until the age of 11 and a half or 12. 12 is a very significant age because logic and reason finally become usable. Mental development, psychological development, and then physical development reach a significant milestone at 12. This is also why many 12-year-old boys are treated like athletes at 12, because muscular development has reached a point where you can finally truly say that a child is a smaller version of an adult. Take, for example, how the rib cage is below the thoracic region in toddlers because their torso is not yet long enough. Right, and their anatomical arrangement is different from most of humanity as adults. But by the time a child is age 10, they're finally developed regular proportion and they become proportionally normal. And their bodies also increase in volume, making more room for muscular development, which will actually be fairly rapid, especially if the child has lots of lactic acid in their diet. So you get the kid out onto the baseball field or the basketball field and fill that capacity for muscular development, as well as for the psychological, emotional, and logical development by teaching them fractions and basic fourth grade logic and science. Now, say we take that all away and do nothing with the developmental stage, then generally speaking, they might just remain the way they were prior to that developmental age, even possibly well into adulthood. What were these people taught as 12-year-olds at that significant age of development? What were they taught? Maybe nothing. Maybe they were left behind, and that's why they seem so developmentally halted. That may be a large part of it. Now, the reason why I think the main reason why the prefrontal cortex of leftists seems to be switched off, so to speak, is because of the regular use of thought-stopping cliches. The key to logic and reason is critical thinking, the ability to sort and determine between fact and fiction, between this makes sense and this does not, this is real and this is not, etc., etc. But there are ways to prevent the critical thought process from engaging. Thought-stopping cliches. Scientists actually have thought-stopping cliches they use quite regularly, such as, that's unscientific. Or anti-conspiracy theorists say, that's just a conspiracy theory. You actually need to stop saying these things because these are actually preventing the prefrontal cortex and the critical thought process from properly engaging, because it brings you to a premature conclusion. The anatomy of a thought-stopping cliche is that it's a catchy statement that is very cliched, sometimes true, but often hyperbolic, that brings us to a premature conclusion so that critical thinking is no longer necessary. The brain sees the thought-stopping cliche and says, oh, we've already reached our conclusion, have we? Then we don't have to go through the process. It stops us early and puts us at a premature pre-conclusion, which creates a barrier between you and the facts. Because you've already got what you wanted, why investigate any further? That's why thought-stopping cliches are so dangerous. Because they're assumptions that bring us to a premature conclusion. And it could be that leftists simply use these on such a regular basis that they almost never engage critically. And that allows that limbic response to dominate their every action. And is why they are so emotional and so childlike. That's another possibility. Now, what's really interesting is, a while back, I used a combination of responses from Antifa pages when I had to essentially provoke them into speaking with me, as well as looking at old YouTube videos back when, like, Rose City Antifa was still willing to be interviewed, and compared them against the bite model. Now, if you're not familiar, the bite model is a model for measuring whether or not something is a cult or is using authoritarian mind control associated with cults, created by an ex-Moonie named Stephen Hassan. Stephen Hassan created the bite model. It stands for body control, informational control, thought control, and emotional control. These are 4 categories of authoritarian mind control, the most common of which is informational control. Now, what I found in my comparison to the bite model is that certain checkboxes were checked off by by anti-fascists, so-called, Specifically, checkboxes such as separation into insider and outsider doctrine, where the cult group separates information into our information and their information, which further gets into another checkbox, which is encouraging black and white, us versus them thinking, which helps to create animosity between the cult and mainstream society. That is to say, that these are common forms of control, and they are very much present in these sort of cultish far-left groups. They're very much present when I compared them to the bite model. And if you could stretch the logic slightly and say that, you know how cults have uniforms? That's under the B in bite control, which is bodily control. Controlling the person's physical reality. Changing, is saying you can only live here, you can only dress like this, you can only have sex with this kind of person, and only at this time, you can only have this many children, you can only eat like this, blah, blah, blah. You could stretch the logic slightly and say that black bloc is like a cult uniform, and that is, in a sense, regulating the person's physical reality, so that could also be a checkbox you check off. Ultimately, many of these far-left groups do have a very cult-like attitude, and even the far right as well. Right? They use separation insider-outsider doctrine and us versus them thinking, which are the cliches of informational control. And no doubt emotional rhetoric is necessary for emotional control, and that is also present. So, suffice to say, Antifa operates similarly to a cult. That is another possibility, that they are under cult mind control, as well as QAnon and possibly even the Proud Boys. Now keep in mind, Gavin McGinnis was not particularly far right and began the Proud Boys as a joke. But they have since devolved into an anti-Antifa group. And my problem with anti-Antifa is that they're just as violent as Antifa is. They decide to fight fire with fire, and all that happens when you do that is you make the fire bigger, you fucking idiot. Seriously, you just make the violence worse, okay? So they're just as bad in a different way. So when it comes right down to it, these people are likely using thought-stopping cliches, which are also a tool of cults. They control their members through thought-stopping cliches. The thought-stopping cliches prevent them from realizing that they are cognitively dissonant when they run across reality, and reality could potentially bring them back from the cult mind control. The facts could adjust their feelings if their logical reasoning abilities see the truth for what it is, and then bring them back to sanity. So thought-stopping cliches are used to control them to prevent this from happening, so they stay within the group. If thought-stopping cliches are being frequently used, which would explain the hyper-emotional nature of leftists, and why they are so irrational, and why they act like toddlers. If thought-stopping cliches are regularly used, that is proof of mind control. And if the bite model work I did proves that there's cult mind control, then that would also serve as a further proof that far-right and far-left groups, extremists, are cults, and that there are mind control measures present. First initially employed by an authority figure who then encourages you to employ those methods on yourself. You become your master. You hold the whip while also being the slave. You whip yourself. I think that's where they're at. And now, I wanted to talk about what they used to do to cultists back in the day, is they would kidnap them, like hold them in a basement and suit them up for re-education or deprogramming. They would use methods largely carrot and stick, similar also to cold turkeying, where you would basically force someone to detox whether they wanted to or not, and this would cause them to essentially return to normal, become a normal, sane person. Now, the ethical issue of kidnapping the individual to do this is obviously very terrible, but in the end, it always worked. It worked for Stephen Hassan. It worked for many other ex-cultists. It is an effective method of deprogramming and re-education to turn the extremist or the cultist back into a normal, sane person. So could this be the solution to the far left? Now, I know the ethical dilemma is there. I remember when extremists were being taken off the streets by vans, which, contrary to popular belief, they were not unmarked. They were thoroughly marked. They were federal vans. Everybody knew it. You know, it was a lie that they were unmarked. It wasn't a secret police pulling people off the street. They were simply removing rioters to increase public safety, which the government has the right to do, by the way, if the rioters are violent. And these people were absolutely violent. It is a bit of an ethical dilemma. It is still effectively a kidnap of a sort, but could not arresting a criminal in the act of a crime be seen as a sort of kidnap? If you're okay with people being arrested and committing a crime, then it shouldn't be a problem to essentially do a sting, trap extremists, grab them off the street, and then start deprogramming them, putting into essentially deprogramming and re-education, evaluating if they have been subjected to mind control and could they be restored to a normal, rational, productive person at last. I think they could. If I am right about them simply being the product of the early liberal parenting of the 90s, then there's not a whole lot we can do other than just arrest them and see them pressed with criminal charges. If I'm right about them being subjected to mind control, then deprogramming and re-education is the correct response. Either way, you're going to have to trap them with a sting to trick them into doing something illegal, catch them in the act, and then arrest them and press them with the appropriate charges. Either way, that's what you're going to have to do. You're going to have to go to Portland, and you're going to have to work to capture Rose City Antifa in the act and start arresting them, pressing them with appropriate charges, and if necessary, deprogramming them in essentially a re-education facility. I think that's what's going to have to happen for Antifa, for BLM, and for Proud Boys and QAnon and all of the far left and far right extremists. No exception. We cannot have this in this country. This is the solution that I think makes sense. So either way, there's no denying that for certain the extremists' prefrontal cortex is effectively switched off and they are not capable of logical reason at the moment. How they arrived in this state of mind is still open for debate, but there's no question that that is where they're at mentally. And that is why we need to essentially get them to switch their prefrontal cortex back on and turn them into normal, rational people, productive citizens. With that being said, thank you for listening, thank you for watching. I'm sorry about not really having equal lighting in here. It's a little bit late in the day, my lighting's not that great, I apologize. But I'm pretty sure you can mostly see my face, you know, see. Anyway, you can see my backdrops. With that being said, there will be links below to my books on Amazon because I am an author. I would like for you to purchase and download and read those. And I think at the moment you can download those for free temporarily so that you can read through them, see if you like them. And if you do like them, please buy them. With that being said, thank you for watching. Tschüss. Peace.